Our formless mother bleeds. The blood calls to us, filling our veins with fire and our bodies with the writhing potential of change. Our formless mother rots. Her eternal decay brings new life into the world and nourishment for all her children. But ever since the great star fell, something is different. Our formless mother stirs. The land cracks beneath us. The swirling air around us is tinged with brilliant gold. More and more of our children are blessed with her divine gift of horns. And now, our formless mother speaks. His voice fills us with light and belonging. His limitless presence leaves us in helpless awe as he calls us his chosen. His Hornsent. Welcome back, Tarnished. And thank you for your patience. My name is Ivor the Bard, and this continues the story of the One Great. Our broken ancestor, the singular form from whence it all came, who will resent us forever for what we took from him. I had always wondered what used to lie at the center of the lands between. The missing chunk of land would have been directly on top of the One Great's withered husk. The formless mother of all living things that we once called the Crucible. I had assumed it was simply destroyed when the Elden Stars hit. I had assumed that the Crucible itself was now too far below ground to have any direct influence. Good Tarnished, I never imagined I would be able to see the lands for myself. To find them mostly intact and in place, metaphysically separated from the rest of the island by a divine veil, held up by the mysterious Erdtree. The Divine Towers, the last remaining structures from Placidusax's sun realm, had indeed been deliberately spared, now used as tent poles keeping the veil in place. The will of the One Great had gone to absurd lengths to hide this land from the rest of the world, and having scoured it from top to bottom, I can see why. If the truths contained here ever reached the outside world, the Golden Order would be ruined. Tarnished. It turns out this story has a hidden chapter. Before Placidusax's prophecy of a girl with wolves would come to pass, before Marika was even born, another civilization would come to dominate the lands between in the aftermath of the Sun Realm's destruction. A civilization that emerged from the most unlikely of places. We'll get to their story in due course. I must admit, upon reaching this mysterious land, the first thought I had was of Placidusax's central tower. If this was where it used to stand, then surely there would be some evidence. Sure enough, I happened upon a pillar that marks the exact center of the lands between. Directly below it, I found buried dragon ruins, matching Faram Azula, that extended deep underground. Compelling though that was, It wasn't until I met Florisax that I was convinced. Ancient dragon Florisax, now in human form, still shepherds Tarnished towards continuing their blood feud with the outcast dragon Bale and his bloodline.
Picture yourself feasting upon a dragon's essence, on the throbbing heart of the oldest, vilest dragon of them all. It would be the purest form of communion.
While Bale is a story for another day, what struck me was Florisax still prayed to Placidusax.
My dear Lord Placidusax, tonight, like every night, my solace is yours. May it grant you sleep in your place beyond time.
As she did so, she turned to face the exact location of the pillar and the central dragon ruins. The place she knew, from personal experience, that Placidusax's tower once stood. Given that the rest of the ill-fated Sun Realm hangs above the ocean to the east, I estimated the Elden stars must have struck it from the west, likely impacting just past the base, as the crow flies. Sure enough, as I gazed out in that direction, a vast abyss filled my view, carving deeper than any other point in the Lands of Shadow. But that wasn't all there was to find. The Elden Stars wasn't just a collection of the One Great's fragmented soul. He had also reclaimed from the void of space 2 lost pieces of his original body. His 2 fingers. They warped the space around them as they fell to Earth, brimming with primordial power, swarming with interstellar parasites. They must have been gigantic, at least initially, creating 2 massive craters to the north and south of the abyssal woods as they landed. Oh, to have been there to see it. Imagine bearing witness to the fingers of the universe, Tarnished. Still living relics of the ultimate reality, the original fingers from which all others derived their meaning. Do you really think you could endure such a thing without being changed? As they lay there, their presence warped the environment around them, causing grotesque swarms of giant stone fingers to grow from the surrounding cliffs and slowly drag themselves towards their master. After all, what chance did mere rock have to maintain its identity against such a force? It was a similar story in both crash sites, but as I explored them I found one crucial difference. The northern ruins had a reverence to them, golden motes of light, dancing before my eyes and resonating with the spark within me. I recognized the feeling instantly, the same onrush of faith I would experience when reciting an incantation. It would seem I wasn't alone either. The inhabitants of the Shadowlands called the Northern Finger Ruins Dio, a name that invokes divinity. The southern crater had a very different feeling. The cold blue chill of the primeval current permeated through every eldritch formation, tugging at my mind in the same fashion as casting sorceries. The local inhabitants called these ruins Rhea, a name that in the old tongue means flowing current. Tarnished, I will never presume to know the intricacies of how the One Great functions, The sheer scale of his existence makes comprehension a fool's errand. Even so, as I stood above those ancient ruins, I felt like I had caught a glimpse. These fingers were more than just lost pieces of himself. The Dio finger was the one great's connection to his soul in all its golden fragments across creation. The Rhea finger was his connection to his mind, now the expanding cosmic void of the primeval current. Together, at the intersection of faith and intelligence, they would act as a conduit to his true intent. Interpreters for his greater will. Heralds of his golden order. They wormed their way underground, slithering through the bedrock like it was liquid until they met in the middle. The stone fingers of the crater slowly converged in their wake, as if to follow them, and the smoothed out tunnels behind them sprouted with even more. They were fingers by definition, an awkward form for what they needed to do. But for beings as powerful as they, working within that definition was not impossible. The two fingers of the one great entwined themselves together, melding so completely that they became one. They grew large, bulky fingers out of their sides to act as sturdy legs. They grew skinny, long fingers to act as spindly arms. They required servants, so from their very flesh they grew a means to birth some. The end result was surprisingly functional, given their limitations. But this mother of fingers was truly a nightmare to behold. The one great knew better than to present this twisted thing as an object of worship for the masses. Their presence would be too much for mere mortals to handle, and besides, they were simply too precious to risk. So, drawing upon their terrifying connection to his mind and soul, they separated themselves from the world we know and created a space entirely their own. I've seen it, Tarnished. It's a strangely calm place, a featureless blue stretching in every direction. The ground was covered in ankle-deep water, yet somehow it felt like we were at the bottom of a lake. Here, they could work unimpeded. Their combined energies summoned a spherical microcosm contained by a golden ring, a wordless conduit for the will of the one great to relay its commands directly. The horrific maw in their chest birthed a steady flow of minions, abominations that would be known as finger creepers. For now, the Mother of Fingers would remain in the shadows, patiently gathering information, communing with the lightless void of his mind. They knew events were already in motion. The lands were in chaos. Nowhere had been safe from the Starfall. The destruction of the Dragon City and the splintered reshaping of the island had caused unimaginable death and loss. The one great paid no mind to their suffering. These tiny sparks of life were of no consequence. His shattered soul and his decaying body were reunited for the first time since the universe began, and he was joyous. The crucible was changing as it began to absorb the golden shards, filling with power and radiating life in a way that hadn't been seen since its earliest days. It was imperceptible on the surface at first. But for the ancestral followers that inhabited this land, devoted and attuned to their formless mother, it became impossible to ignore. The Crucible's overflowing abundance of life began to affect all within a creeping proximity on the surface, stimulating growth, blurring the divide of species once more. Insects grew massive. Tortoises grew hair, and even second heads. Beasts of all kinds grew crowns of twisting horns. The ancestral followers were a people that put the spread and diversity of life at the center of their worship and practices. The Crucible was the divine source of life, but it was the mechanisms by which that life spread and thrived. That was the true divinity. The rare branch-like horns that marked a being as a new bud for great trees. The ancestral spirits that collected our essence in death and transported it to new lands. All were observed, celebrated and tended to. As the will of the One Great burrowed its way into their hearts, these practices began to invert. It was subtle at first. The horns of the chosen were present on every head now, an anointed people, rather than simply a people with a few lucky members. The previously branch-like horns grew dense and twisted, spiraling in on themselves like the divine beasts of old. Spiraling like the flow of the primeval current itself, twisting up from the One Great's husk below. Medicinal talismans created with these spiral horns were much more potent than their older attempts, and through them, their attunement to the Crucible grew stronger than ever. Strong enough to feel the presence behind the changes. Our formless mother speaks. His voice fills us with light and belonging. His limitless presence leaves us in helpless awe as he calls us his chosen. His Hornsent. Their perception of the Crucible had shifted with this new divine clarity. No longer was it an abstract mass of living potential. Instead, they worshipped its original form as the body of their ultimate ancestor. Where once they saw all life as a gift from the formless mother, now they saw a great hierarchy of divinity. Their ultimate father at the pinnacle and all other life defined by how much of that original power they contained. Ancient creatures from the Crucible's early days, brimming with power and covered in spiraling horns, were divine beasts, superior to the unfortunate wretches born today. This immutable hierarchy inevitably imposed itself within Hornsent society. Their very horns became a source of fierce divine competition, as those who cultivated larger, more tightly spiraled horns were awarded power and status. There were some amongst the followers that resisted this change of focus. They rejected this new backward-facing worship, believing it to be antithetical to the traditions that had been the center of their community for millennia. They left, in the end. I do not know if they did so willingly or were driven out. You can find them. In many places the Erdtree's light does not reach, practicing the old ways of the ancestral followers and cultivating new life free from the greater will's influence. In the lands of the Hornsent, all that remained were true believers. Where once there were a people that found wonder in the natural world around them, there now stood the Hornsent, who cared only for themselves and their legacy. A ruthless and bigoted empire that believed themselves to be the Crucible's exalted guardians, inheritors and executors of his divine will. The inversion was complete, good tarnished. The age of the Hornsent had begun. The crucible current was tinged with gold. The voice of his greater will was unclear, but the feeling, the intent, was not.
Feed the spiral. Make it stronger. Build it higher.
The One Great was obsessed, and that obsession saturated his new servants down to the fundamentals of their culture. From their columns to their towers to their ornaments and candles, their towns were filled with spirals. They built their capital of Belorat at the center of the current. Through their horns, the most blessed among them could channel its energy, invoking its golden arcs and swirling spirals and divine incantation. Here they danced and sang in celebration of their god, their flowing movements mimicking the great spiral and enhancing their spiritual connection to it. The voice was clearer now, oozing honeyed promises.
Tame the spiral. Build a stair. Reach the sky. Join the gods.
The Hornsent knew in their souls that paradise awaited them above. The top of every doorframe was crowned with a mural of their ancestors, waiting to meet them beyond the threshold. But no stone tower could possibly be built tall enough. So began the quest to fulfill their master's plan. Reach the sky by any means necessary. A great inquisition was formed to find a way of accomplishing this feat. Their thirst for knowledge caused Hornsent scholars to scour the lands between for answers. They studied the ruins of eras past, the nature of the crucible current, and under the guidance of the greater will, they found what they were looking for. From the ruins of Ra, a civilization older even than the dragons, they discovered that living spirits could be contained and controlled as long as the right conditions were met. From the smithing arts of the ruined forges, they learned that soul-infused objects can be crafted to have extraordinary magical properties. And from the broken remains of Placidusax's lost city, they discovered the final piece of the puzzle. The Inquisition had found what it was looking for. To carry out the will of the One Great, they would require people. An unknown multitude of people. In the following decades, the Hornsent became an empire of slavers, a blight on all humanity that dared be born hornless. They were unstoppable. Their connection to the Crucible gave them access to incredible power, the strongest amongst them able to invoke a wide variety of fearsome incantations, even controlling the weather in the immediate area. The One Great had taken everything from the dragons, so now he allowed his new servants controlled access to their power. The lands between and surrounding continents were raided over and over again. The sheer number of new slaves meant entire villages had to be built to house them. Makeshift hovels teeming with desperate and terrified people. Often a mere stone's throw from the opulent towns the Hornsent had built for themselves. Oh, the cruelty these wretches faced, dear Tarnished. The Hornsent were drunk on their own superiority, intoxicated by the call of the Golden Spiral. They tore at the slaves' bodies with whips lined with human teeth. They butchered entire villages and stuffed them in pieces into treated pots. Butchered, but still alive, owing to a particularly twisted use of the regenerating power of the crucible. They called this process sainthood, in what I can only imagine was an attempt to deny the horror of their actions. What better way to keep them fresh until they reached their destination? In a chilling parallel to their master's perspective, they were no longer capable of seeing humanity in their victims. Only ungrateful tributes to a grander vision. And what a vision it was. For the first step, a strange pillar was built directly on top of the base of Placidusax's tower. The pillar would suppress the dead, stifling the natural flow of spirits out into the great beyond and leaving them trapped on the surface. Slowly but surely, their essence was rendered down, reducing them to gravestones, then ghosts of gravestones, until they faded from existence entirely. All in this land would be processed, their energy flowing back to reinforce the crucible current. Magical constructs called gravebirds would stand watch over the spirit graves, ensuring nothing escaped.
Feed the spiral. Make it stronger. Build it higher.
The next step truly beggars belief. Twisting upward from Bellarat at the center of the crucible current, forged over decades by slaves and tempered with dancing and prayer, the Hornsent's answer to the One Great's demands was a monument unlike anything before or since. The Spiral Tower of Enir Ellim. Tarnished, if only I could describe the moment I first set eyes on it. Spiraling staircases ascending on ornate and delicate columns, suspended temples with clusters of hanging pagodas underneath. A temple to the One Great, a celebration of the crucible current, and a stair to reach the heavens all at once. It was impossibly beautiful. And impossibly tall. I am no architect, Tarnished, but even I knew from a glance that this structure should have collapsed immediately under its own weight. The thin, wispy supports and gigantic floating platforms mocked the very notion of cause and effect. Something was not right here. So I looked closer, and as the truth dawned on me, every feeling of wonder Enir Ellim inspired was replaced with a bottomless horror. The One Great had learnt much from his last project at Faram Azula. Back then, he had sealed living beings into the stone buildings to infuse them with his spark. But here, more energy was needed. And so he had adapted his methods. I felt sick. The Spiral Tower was not built by slaves. It was built from slaves. Transmuted from their luckless bodies, using the crucible's energy and sand as mortar. Such a concentration of power was more than enough to keep this abomination intact. The Hornsent had a stair made of misery and death, Tarnished. and all they could think to do was keep building it higher, certain that through enough violence they could finally reach paradise. We have seen this all before, dear Tarnished, so look closely and learn it well. The One Great will promise many things, but in the end he will deliver nothing but gilded death. No wonder they needed so many people. You could empty entire cities and still not be finished feeding this atrocity. I'm sure their victims were comforted to be declared saints, as they were used as living bricks. The butchery continued. Slave villages were filled, emptied and filled again. The Hornsent were honing their craft, creating great halls with spiraling columns and intricate mosaics. Courtyards were lined with statues depicting two figures melding in the embrace of the crucible current. Their connection to the golden spiral grew stronger as Enir Ellim took shape, filling their minds with inspiration and their bodies with primal energy. As they built, they experimented further. They had discovered that certain slaves, usually women, had an affinity with nature that was amplified by their proximity to the crucible. A few had embraced it in sheer panic rather than be taken to the tower, their bodies turning to wood and sprouting strange, twisted trees at the expense of their lives. The Hornsent saw only opportunity in their suffering. By controlling this affinity, under the guidance of his greater will, these luckless women could be transmuted into wood and melded together. The result was a living tree of gleaming gold, a worthy adornment for a heavenly tower. You can still see the shape of their bodies in the bark, grafted together in silent despair. Women that had this unfortunate gift were designated as shrine maidens, separated from the other slaves and kept in their own village to the north. The community they formed, despite their circumstances, was truly heartwarming, a testament to our ability to care for one another in times of trauma. Even though they didn't choose to be there, even though they could be taken away without warning, the women of the village stuck together, working and praying as one. The Hornsent came to take them one day. They often did, but this was different. All were to be sent to the tower, no exceptions. Perhaps some tried to fight, to beg, to flee. We only know of one who escaped. Deep in the finger ruins of Dio, where even the Hornsent dared not tread, a Newman girl named Marika hid with her 2 children, weeping for her new sisters and cursing the demons that had taken everything from her. Ever listening, the Mother of Fingers stirred. This is what they had been waiting for. An elongated union of 2 fingers extended out from their pocket of space into the underground of our material plane, worming like a vine towards the surface. From the fog of the ruins, a voice called to Marika in her lowest moment, a voice that filled her mind with light and resonated powerfully within her. She followed the voice to their source and was met with a truly peculiar sight. 2 fingers poking out of the ground. Enir Ellim was complete. The stairway to the gods reached unbroken into the sky. the countless dead within it acting as a guiding path for the crucible current. The golden spiral was tamed, pulsing uniformly along the edge of the main structure, focused and refined. The Hornsent were elated. At the summit of Enir Ellim, the voice of his greater will was clear and his presence was overwhelming. He had a new task for them. The final sacrifice to open the gates of divinity.
Find my chosen vessel. She will lead you to the gods. She will lead you to me.
Marika knelt in awe before the two fingers. The thing in front of her was strange and unfinished, but the voice that spoke through it rang with the authority of all existence. The tale it wove was very different.
All is not lost. Take my blessing. Become my vessel. Avenge your sisters, and paradise will be yours to create.
What would you do, Tarnished, if given such a choice? Your every desire, good and ill, dangled in front of you at your lowest moment. You think you could resist, but you forget that his will always be the greater will. Marika bowed before the two fingers, raised her palms to the sky, and accepted their blessing. Golden energy flowed from the tips of the fingers to her outstretched hands. The strength of 1,000 men, the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes, and the power of a raging storm flowed through her. She stood, her eyes glowing a brilliant gold. She was ready for her task. The Hornsent rejoiced. The chosen vessel had made herself known, and there could be no doubt she spoke true. With dancing and great ceremony, they escorted her up the divine stair. The people below in Ballarat cheered as their divine dragon performers danced and swooped with stormy abandon, channeling the spirits of the ancient beasts. I wonder if any of them recognized the slave woman that they had treated so cruelly. I wonder if any of them had ever looked a captive in the eye. The crucible current wreathed Enir Ellim in blinding gold. Marika stood at the summit with her children as the crowd chanted around them. The current, the tower, the multitudes of chanting Hornsent, all were aligned for a display of energy and belief greater than any the world had ever seen. But to what purpose, Tarnished? You know as well as I do by this point that the One Great had deceived them. There is no heavenly procession of gods to find up there among the clouds. So what do you think he was really after? It took me a while, and when I stumbled upon the answer, I could scarcely believe it. The original sin. The truth of the fell god of fire. Marika held up her hand, the will of the One Great acting through her as she channeled that monstrous power, and stole the very sun from the sky. The Tower of Enir Ellim was never a temple, good Tarnished, nor was it a stairway to paradise. It was a snare, a gilded trap designed to harness the crucible current and drag one of the most powerful entities in existence out of its orbit. The fell god of fire is the sun. What better avatar for the concept of flames? The forbidden incantation of the Firekeepers evokes his image whenever I recite it, and yet I never made the connection. Of course the One Great was seeking it. The sheer quantity of his life force it contains is likely unmatched in all existence. As the shackles of spiraling gold brought the horrific visage of the fell god closer, the Hornsent's elation turned to awe, then to fear, then to panic. It was already far too late. The sheer mass of the golden god dragged the Hornsent towards it, screaming and burning as they tumbled helplessly along the ground. Marika seized the opportunity, piling them up into a grisly pillar for the sun to rest on. The heat they were subject to was so extreme it instantly turned them to ash, preserving them in their final, agonized moments. Make a stair. Meet the gods. The fell god sat on top of the tower like a flame on a candle, its presence causing utter chaos to the surrounding lands. The hillsides were scorched black, towns were reduced to charcoal ruins, and the roads were burned away until only a blackened trench remained. While Enir Ellim was immune due to its supernatural construction, the city of Ballarat was not, and it burned so ferociously the tops of the buildings crumbled into slag. We have seen this all before, dear Tarnished, so look closely and learn it well. The One Great will promise many things, but in the end, he will deliver nothing but gilded death. Concentrating fiercely, our avenging Shrine Maiden held the struggling sun in place as she began to siphon its power. Her frightened children, Mesmer and Melina, stood protected at her side, transfixed by the vision of flame before them. A blinding stream of heat and light cut the pillar of ashen bodies clean in two, carving a path through the countless dead to Marika's outstretched palm. By the will of the One Great, with all the might of the Elden Stars and the Crucible, she would take the fell god's power and make it her own. But it was too much for her on her own. It was always going to be. Her mere human frame was threatening to collapse, so the greater will acted through her to complete the task. I will never quite know how he achieved it, Tarnished, but he separated the sun's power on a conceptual level, extracting from Marika all the destructive fire, the burning fury, and giving it new form. A hideous serpent, burning wickedly and shorn of light, squirmed and thrashed as it was ripped from the sun and forcibly merged into the living flesh of the only beings close by. Marika's two children. When the Newman woman came to her senses again, the ritual was complete. Her vengeance was complete. Her captors, the horned devils who had taken everything from her, were ash beneath her feet. The fell god was caged. Shimmering threads of the One Great's golden will bound it tightly to Marika in a seal of absolute causality. The gentle warmth and life-giving power of the unwilling god belonged to her now, and her very body overflowed with blinding light. There is no gate of divinity in this world, Tarnished. No sacred rite that gifts a person godhood. There is only power, and those who wield enough of it will always seem as gods to the rest of us. From that moment forward, Marika was the living avatar of light and life. Vessel for the greater will. Goddess of the sun. the will of the One Great was ravenous and impatient. So much of his golden essence, from the Elden Stars, from the Crucible, from the countless dead around them, and from the sun itself, had been gathered within this one perfect vessel. Acting through her once again, he combined them all, melding the shattered pieces of his being together for the first time since the beginning of the universe. Standing tall over the ashes of her captors, Marika held out her hands as an arc of purest gold wove itself within them. All creation cowered in fear, flickering and rumbling as the first flawless sliver of the One Great Soul was held aloft. Our Newman woman, free of her tormentors at last, felt the Greater Will's elation as if it were her own. Then she turned around, and all of her joy turned to horror. Melina was gone. Her beloved daughter was gone, incinerated during the binding ritual. I do not know if her death was a mistake or a necessary part of the binding, dear Tarnished, but it does not matter. I know for certain that the Greater Will did not care in the slightest about keeping her alive. Mesmer convulsed on the ground, a vile serpent struggling to break free from his body. Racked with guilt, Marika held her stricken son in her arms. Her healing would have cured any worldly ailment, but thanks to their divine merging, the serpent's fire manifested within his very flesh. Knowing it was his own body that was killing him, Marika plucked his right eye from its socket. And within that burning void, she fashioned a new one. Into it she poured the sunlight's healing warmth and the Greater Will's immutable strength, soothing the serpent's temper and suppressing its burning fury. An imperfect seal of golden grace. Mesmer was saved, but not fully cured. For the rest of his days, he would be cursed with burning pain, keeping company with the product of Marika's original sin. Brimming with power and wrought with conflicting emotion, our new goddess returned to the northern finger ruins with the bound sun. The two fingers took it from her eagerly and began their work, retracting underground towards the crucible. With the Greater Will occupied, Marika walked quietly to the village close by, the village that only a day ago she had called home. The light from her body bathed the hovels in gold as she cried out for her sisters, hoping that someone, anyone was there to hear her. No one answered. The goddess finally had the power to save them all. But there was no one left to save. She found the remains of one of the elders at the top of the hill, who had turned herself into a tree rather than be taken to the tower. There she knelt, processing all that she had been through, grieving for all the Hornsent had taken from her. Perhaps she prayed to her elder for guidance. Perhaps she confessed that she could not save the others. Or perhaps, as I like to think, she vowed with immutable resolve that next time she would protect her people. That all her oppressors would fall and the lands between would be a sanctuary for the enslaved and the downtrodden. 1,000 years guided by grace. She cut loose a braid of her hair and offered it to the tree. Her mind was clear. Her path was set. In this moment, free from the influence of the greater will. Marika used the power within her to create a golden tree. A tree that would last for eternity and gently bathe the village in healing light. A silent memorial to a wish unfulfilled. To a peaceful life that never was. To a village that was kind in a world filled with cruelty. Then she left, good tarnished, never to return again. Her blessing endures to this day, sustaining an abundance of colourful flowers and verdant trees. The two fingers wormed their way down to the heart of the crucible with the bound sun, planting it like a seed in the organic mass. The will of the One Great acted through Marika to harness that colossal power, channeling it into a divine act that would change the lands between forever. The great tree growing from the crucible, the first tree to ever exist, stirred and began to grow once more. The One Great's chosen vessel poured into it the primordial life of the crucible, the captive sun and the elden stars, all the countless souls that had been taken to fuel his ambition through history. She poured into it her blood, her grief, her hope, everything she was and would hope to be, binding herself irrevocably to its fate. All of those pieces of his soul converging into the living wood. The tree reached hungrily towards the stars, growing taller than the divine towers, taller even than Enir Ellim. Its bark began to glow from within, radiating golden light. This was why the will of the One Great chose Marika. This was why he had encouraged the Hornsent to find slaves with an affinity for trees and experiment with their use. A tower packed with corpses can channel his energy, tarnished, but it's inefficient and rigid. A living tree can grow and change. It can regenerate itself and redirect his living energy seamlessly, adapting to his needs. The perfect vessel for his soul. The perfect cocoon for his rebirth. The Erdtree. I'd had my suspicions that the One Great deliberately spared the divine towers. I would never have thought it was to use them as tent poles. In the first act of its hallowed existence, a shimmering veil extended from the Erdtree and out over the divine towers, fully engulfing the land between them. The scale at which our shattered father thinks always takes some adjustment. The crucible. Enir Ellim. The spirit graves. The impact sites of the two fingers and the elden stars. All would be removed from the outside world, slowly slipping from history into legend and myth. This was no mere illusion, tarnished. Everything within the veil was taken, moved to a plane of reality that exists only within the Erdtree, without actually moving at all. Thus were the lands of shadow made. Only the Erdtree existed on both planes at once, and so it became the conduit. For now, the only means of passage from one to the other. Those on the outside could see only a gulf, filled with seawater and ringed by the towers. The Erdtree shone a magnificent gold, beautifully shaped like an old oak. Those on the inside were trapped with no recourse. their horizon dominated by the divine veil held up by a tree that could not be more different. An outer order of golden paradise. An inner order of despair and death. The shadow tree is the shadow of the Erdtree, tarnished, but that is only part of the truth. It is the Erdtree's living core, its true form when all the blinding glamours are stripped away. For now, it is a single stalk standing tall in the sky. A second seed will be planted, and a second stalk will grow to entwine with the first. The sun within will eventually escape captivity, causing the great golden fracture we see running down its trunk today. But those are stories for another time. The miracle was complete. The lands between had been changed forever. The age of the Erdtree had begun. We live now in the aftermath of these cataclysmic events. The sunflowers know. On the Altus Plateau and within the lands of shadow, they face the Erdtree for sustenance, bathing in its pilfered sunlight. Radiant like a second sun. My words seem so foolish in hindsight, so close, yet so far from the mark. The Dung-Eater knows. I don't know how it is possible, dear Tarnished, but he knows what transpired on Enir Ellim that day. He wears a medallion of the sun around his neck, and armour that resembles a mutilated Hornsent. He must have been granted a vision of the Fell God's capture, an insight into the original sin. The vision drove him insane. Too much horror for one mortal mind to bear. He lashes out at all Tarnished, hoping to defile the Golden Order one tortured soul at a time.
Curse you, Golden Order. One day, you'll get what's coming.
Gold Mask knows. His connection to the Greater Will was always said to run deep, dear Tarnished, and it would seem he is no fraud. He has seen what the Erdtree used to be, the origin of its healing light. His mask was the sun this entire time, hiding in plain sight behind our ignorance. Enir Ellim is crumbling. The power that held it aloft was taken on that fateful day. The crucible current diverted to its master's new vessel. Sand and bodies pour from the tower's fractures as the transmutation loses effect, and it reverts back into its material components. The space where the Fell God rested atop the pillar of corpses still radiates leftover sunlight, trapping Enir Ellim in an eternal day. The Hornsent were broken that day, but a few survived. The visage of the Fell God has seared itself into their collective memory, haunting their sagas and childhood fairy tales. When Mesmer invaded the lands of shadows centuries later, he would exploit this trauma, crafting giant flaming golems with the image of the sun leering from their chest. All of the blame for that day fell on Marika. They told of the golden-haired strumpet, the false prophet who perverted their creator's will and took their destiny for herself.
Horn-decked beast from higher sphere delivered, we beg of thee to dance and cavort, dance and cavort. Cleanse all that thou wilt, cruelty, Woe, and those who plague the tower. Cleanse away the strumpet's vile progeny.
Never has it occurred to them that their god betrayed them, that they were merely another tool to be used and discarded. Even now, in this pitiable state, their imaginary supremacy prevents them from seeing the truth. Ironically, it was their horns, their connection to the crucible, that led to their abandonment. The will of the One Great wishes to erase his true identity, to suppress all knowledge of the true origin of life, so their very existence was a threat that had to be contained. And so they suffered, trapped in life by the Shadow Tree's veil, and trapped in death by the suppressing pillar that they themselves had built. In their thousands, they wandered in listless pain as the inner order drained them of their golden spark, reducing them to blackened shades, then spiritual gravestones, then nothing at all. Their life force consumed by the Erdtree. They had hoped to join their god, and in the worst possible way he had granted their wish. After all, they were in his stomach. Marika emerged from the Erdtree into the Outer Order, a new god for a new age. All other gods would be against her, but by the power of the greater will, she would create her paradise. If only she knew that her benefactor was also the will behind every horror the Hornsent had inflicted upon her. Deep in the center of the Erdtree, nestled in the heart of the Shadow Tree, the pure golden sliver Marika had created on top of Enir Ellim hangs suspended in the pitch-black void. All of the life the Erdtree harvests, all of the distilled energy the One Great has collected, is drawn to this point, blessings pooling and then integrating into the golden arc. The One Great Soul silently weaving itself back together. The most dangerous object in existence, capable of bending reality to his will. Or as we have come to know it, the Elden Ring.